Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the world of the paranormal. So grab your flashlights and let the darkness take control. This story takes place around 2008, in one of the cooler months when I was around 16. I was living in my hometown of Pennsylvania and had just gotten my first car that I called Lucy. She was a 1999 VW drop-top cabrio, and she meant ultimate freedom. So needless to say, I drove everywhere I could any chance I got. The second house I grew up in was in the suburbs of this boring little town, with not too many places for a 16-year-old to just hang out. We usually drove around fields or went to the mountains to hike, and the river to just chill and talk. There were also these old railroad tracks that were still in use, a few blocks from the house I grew up in. A few friends and I would go down there late at night to climb on top of the train cars and just run around and cause trouble. Sometimes we would bring bottles of liqueur and sit in the cars and drink. One of these cars was actually open. It must have been some kind of conductor's car, but it wasn't at the front of the train, and sometimes it would just sit there for days. The tracks could feel very creepy and sometimes negative in the dark of night. One time even my sister said she saw a shadow darting around this open train car. We'd heard stories, or urban legends if you will, about a girl that had died on the tracks many years ago, but there was no telling if it was true or not. In front of the train tracks, there was also an old truck stop. My parents had told me that sometime in the 80s or 90s, there was a sex worker that was decapitated there. No telling of what other things may have gone on. There were also creepy bars and motels nearby that gave everyone a bad vibe. In short, this area had its trouble, but when I grew up, it had taken a turn and become a nice suburb and strip malls and things like that. Right next to the tracks, there was this strip mall building that had offices in it. We would sometimes drive down the lane that went behind the building, and to the left of us was a fence, then the tracks. My friend Ryan and I decided to go for a nighttime drive one evening and had one of the scariest experiences of our lives. This experience made me question my sanity, my faith, and the material world as I knew it. We sat in the car for maybe 20 minutes before the window began fogging up. I began to see images in the condensation of the windows. There were little droplets forming faces and such, and I started tracing them with my finger to see them more clearly to show Ryan. The one image I remember the most that really stood out to me was the shape of the generalized idea of what the devil looks like, an evil, horned man with a long chin and creepy smile. This shocked and terrified me. I began to get nervous and anxious from witnessing this strange event. Ryan, on the other hand, was on the phone with another friend at the time, being a bit distracted. He didn't seem too fazed by this. And then it happened. I began to feel strange. It felt like I had lost control of my body, and that I was a spectator looking from above. I witnessed my arms start to twist and bend, and then I saw myself speaking in this horrible raspy voice. All the while Ryan is witnessing this and becomes terrified. His screams must have brought me back from my trance-like state, just enough to tell him I was scared too, and not to leave me. I felt then as if I had come back to my body, and I was in a daze. And then I saw something outside my window. It looked as though there was a figure standing right up against the window. It took a second to make it out through the condensation, but what I saw terrified me even more. It looked like a girl with long dark hair wearing a blue dress and a white apron. This, whatever it was standing so close to the car I couldn't even see her head, only from the shoulders down. There was no calm or ability to collect myself, and I put the pedal to the metal and got us out of there. I've only ever gone back once in the daytime with my nephew, but hell, I will never return at night. You never know what is lurking in the shadows. I am now a paranormal investigator, and my curiosity of the spirit world and the unexplained will be with me till the end of my days. All I want everyone to know is that if you plan to explore it, make it always a top priority to protect yourself before entering these situations. This happened many years ago, about 3 years after my father died, while I still lived in my childhood home. My father was a very large man, over 6 feet tall and weighing in at over 300 pounds. Well, every night without fail when I was a child, he would come and check on me whenever he was on his way to bed. He loved his horror movies, but my mother hated them, so he would watch them after she went to bed. They slept on the floor above me. One night, me and my dog Buddy were still awake at around midnight, the usual time he would come to check in on us. I heard his footsteps coming up the hallway. We lived in a really old house, and him being such a huge dude had a very specific sound when he walked through the hallway. I heard it. The same steps, the same weight, the same pace, all the way up the hallway to my bedroom door. I had never been so hopeful and terrified at the same time. All I wanted was for him to walk back in my door. I would have chalked it up to the stress of losing him, or maybe just the floorboards settling. But it stopped right when it reached my door. And then, right as Buddy was fixated on my door handle, the same movement I would have seen. Buddy got up off my bed, walked to the door, sniffed the door crack, and his tail began to wag. And I began to cry. Never believed in it before. I don't know if I believe in it now, but I can hope. I was never ready to lose him. I don't think I ever would have been. But hearing those steps sometimes when I stay in that old room brings me more comfort than anything ever possibly could. I woke up one night being pulled out of my bed. My lower body was off the bed, my top half still on. I jumped up and turned on the lights and was thinking my nephew was just trying to scare me. But no one was there. My bedroom door was closed and no one was under the bed. No one in the closet. No one in the bathroom. I thought maybe it was a nightmare, and I had somehow moved myself halfway off the bed. Well, for 2 weeks after that, something would start tugging my covers at the foot of my bed, slowly pulling them off me. I would jerk them back up and onto the bed, and tuck them under my feet. I slept with the lights on for a very long time after that, and hardly slept at night, but would fall asleep from exhaustion, only to have the blankets pulled slowly down once again. One night, while staying at my sister's house, I was sleeping in a bed that had a metal headboard and footboard. I was awoken to what sounded like metal pipes being slammed against the footboard, same as the other story. I jumped up, turned the light on, and no one was there, but I could feel the vibrations as the bed was hit, and it hit it about 10 times in a row. One house I lived in had a shadow person. It would go down the hallway towards the bedrooms. I saw it. All of my 3 kids saw it. My now ex-husband did not believe us. One day the kids and I went shopping, while he stayed home. When we got back, he looked at me in a very serious way and said, "I saw your shadow man, and I have never felt so vindicated in all my life." I want to share a story. I believe there is a presence in my family's house. Now, there are 2 houses on our property, a large one that we rent and a small one that we stay in. When we aren't renting it, we enjoy living in the big house and stay in the guest bedrooms. I'm currently staying in the room on the 1st floor, and my parents usually stay in the master bedroom upstairs. Occasionally they will go back to the small house to stay in their designated room out there, but since I like the larger house so much, I usually stay in it alone. I'm not incredibly terrified of anything happening when I'm alone on the first floor of the house, as we're in a pretty good town. I do, however, spend my leisurely time enjoying Reddit stories about the paranormal in Let's Not Meet. That being said, I have always had scenarios playing in my head. I'm very much a night person, and before I got a puppy a few weeks ago, my schedule was even worse than it is now. Thank you for listening to the context, and on to the story. Over the last few months, I have been noticing very small things around the house at the very late hours. The most common is a door opening or closing slightly and causing the hinges to make a deep groaning sound. I usually don't see the doors move, but I always hear the familiar noise it would make if I were to move it. Each time I feel the wind flow, but there's nothing there. Keep in mind these are very heavy, solid wooden doors that have no reason to be swinging around at night. I've only noticed this occurring with a closet door in our hallway, which is built in the same stairs, and the guest bedroom door to the one I'm staying in. Usually my response to the closet door opening or closing is to look behind my shoulder when I hear the hinges groan, and I say loudly, "Do you mind?" Then I return to what I'm doing. There are a number of odd experiences I wish to share, starting now. This Halloween I had a friend over so that we could do festive things and watch some classic Tim Burton movies. As we sat there after dark, in the dining room enjoying some fall-themed cookies, she suddenly stared at me dead in the face and told me she had felt something by her legs. When prompted further, she explained that she had put her hand on her lap with her cookie in it, and what felt like a dog brushed by to reach for it. We have a large dog as well as a puppy, and she looked down expecting to see him under the table, but there was nothing there. But she swore there was the presence of a black dog. None of our dogs are black, and none of them were underneath. We did have a black lab that died 7 years ago, but she didn't know this. One of the most recent and scariest encounters I've experienced involved my new dog. I keep her with me at night, and she always chills on the bed when she's with me. She's a mini schnauzer, and she's always incredibly alert. She's pretty bonded to me, and will go and bark at my parents if they sneak up on her. I was just at the computer doing schoolwork, and my parents had gone to bed hours ago, when all of a sudden she started to bark exactly as she would at a person, perched at the end of the bed facing the closet and the bedroom door. I was immediately freaked out, but assumed it was my mother, who was a light sleeper, coming to check on me. That was until I noticed the door, which was open about 7 inches, gracefully closed by itself. I thought that I must have missed her hand on the door or something, but the hallway was lit very well at the time, and before it had closed, I had looked through and clearly seen nothing and no one. Paranoia set in, so I yelled out, "Mum?" to no avail. I very cautiously grabbed the nearest sharpened pencil from my homework setup and slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty, and no one was awake. I'm convinced that my dog either saw or sensed something that night, and for whatever reason felt the need to alert me. Now the bedroom door has moved before, but never usually that far. Usually I hear the latch squeak when it moves, which has grown completely normal for me. But not like this. This was too freaky. I used to have horrible nightmares, and a night terror I had was that I was laying in bed waiting to fall asleep, when all of a sudden a voice passed through my head whispering. I felt this sense of foggy blackness in my head, and the sensation of someone choking me. When I awoke, I was gasping for air. It seemed too real. I had another dream. I was in my bed but couldn't move. My room seemed to loom over me, and there was this dim lighting. All of a sudden, this fuzzy, glowing figure started to emerge from below my bed. He was very tall, but he had no defined edges of his figure, because they were constantly moving. My best way to describe it is that he was made of electricity, because it made staticky noises, it crackled and buzzed, and my terror grew as his featureless face and body seemed to reach out to me. All of a sudden, I was shaking with uncontrollable fear and panic at the same electricity he seemed to give off. Around that time, I woke up. Maybe it's unrelated. Just some additional context. I live in a place where the indigenous people were pushed out like so many others, and our property is actually built over what we assume to be an ancient fishing camp. We found lures, old stone-carved bowls and fish hooks. It was around 11:35 and it had just rained. I was in the small house bathroom and leaned my head out the window to smell the wonderful earthy scent. As I did so, I heard chanting in the native language. I know because in school we were taught parts of the native language. I got chicken skin. Then chanting used words that I couldn't understand, but were definitely the native tongue. What's even more chilling was that it sounded like it was inside my head, but not in the way you would imagine and narrate it with a voice inside it. I wasn't hearing my voice. I was hearing an elderly voice chanting foreign words. It was as though it was all around my head for 5 to 10 seconds, and I was just frozen listening. There are no words to describe it in all honesty, and there's nothing like it for those who have not experienced it. Make what you will of these stories. It was late September of 2018. My girlfriend and I were riding around the Regalsville, Pennsylvania / Milford, New Jersey area, which are two small, quaint towns divided by the Delaware River. The time was between 9 to 10 p.m. when we pulled into the Regalsville boat launch, which is actually on the New Jersey side. I parked my car on the far side of the lot, backing up against the abandoned railroad trestle, and we got out. We started talking while still in the area of the car, and I cracked open my first and only beer can of the night. Soon after we arrive and proceeded to relax, I see movement coming from the area of the Delaware River, from a wooded area. That's when I saw a being, very tall, dark, and what appeared to be long, hairy arms, walk across the other end of the dimly lit parking lot. When it crossed in front of the portable john, it was smaller than the toilet unit. At first I thought, must be a weird homeless man living there, and I wrote off the long hairy arms as this homeless person having a large puffy winter jacket, which again I thought was pretty odd as it was mid-late September, and I was wearing shorts and a light jacket. Just in case, I go to the trunk of my car and pulled out my tire iron. I drag it across the ground to make noise in the hopes of scaring off and/or avoiding confrontation with the homeless person. But I felt very small and powerless wielding the tire iron. Moments later, from about 50 feet to the right of us, down a steep embankment running into the river, we hear 3 loud, distinct thuds. It sounded like tree knocks. We both freeze, and my girlfriend suggests that maybe it's time to leave, as the feeling in the air is heavy. I say no, and that we will not be scared away. We continue to chat briefly when all of a sudden a large humanoid shadow appears over us, which would be standing directly behind us on the railroad trestle. This figure has large, broad shoulders, a large head, and I freeze and say to my girlfriend, "Shh, stand still and don't peep." I'm watching the shadow of this thing in front of me, when I see its shoulders kind of dip back in one fluid motion, while I again see the same loose hair as the first person I saw crossing the porta potty. I very nervously say, "Get in the car." I hop in and peel out of there. In the car I'm stammering, questioning myself as to what the hell that was. I'm shaking and scared, trying to connect the dots. What was it? I do about a 2-mile loop and quickly come back and do a U-turn in the boat launch to shine my headlights into whatever I saw. But of course, at this point, nothing was there. I drive back into Pennsylvania over the bridge and pull into the Regalsville Inn. At this point, I'm shaken to my core, not understanding what I saw. I'm nearly crying and shaken up. At this point, I did not pin it on Bigfoot. I simply did not know. And after we returned back to her house, I could not sleep. I'm searching the internet high and low about what it possibly could have been. When I stumbled upon Bigfoot tree knocks, I froze. The knocks in those videos were exactly what we heard. I woke her up to confirm this. Only then, when I realized I might have seen a Bigfoot, that's when the facts started settling in. The large being that passed in front of the porta-john was taller than the toilet unit. The puffy winter coat sure looked like long hairy arms, not arms in a puffy jacket. The tree knocks, the figure that appeared in the shadow over/behind us, had the same scraggly hair and large broad shoulders. To this day, I'm not sure of what I saw. The signs, however, do all point to a Bigfoot. I was so disturbed by this encounter that the very next morning I actually went back to the boat launch in an attempt to find anything that could help me piece together what happened. I searched the area where I first saw it appear to no avail. The location we heard the tree knocks was incredibly inaccessible, as it was steeply downhill and directly into the river. To this day, I'm stunned by this encounter, and honestly haven't shared this with many people. But I know what I saw, and forever ingrained in my mind will be the image of the large being crossing in front of and being taller than the porta potty, with its long hair hanging off its arms, while taking long strides in the woods on the other side. It's also worth noting that Bigfoot or any other cryptid or paranormal creature were not on my mind when I had this encounter. When I was in preschool, we lived in my grandmother's house while our apartment was being built. The thing is, my grandmother had already passed away. The house was in Bitola, Macedonia, next to the river Dragor. It was built in the 50s, back in the days of Yugoslavia, by my grandfather from my mother's side. The house is small. There's a metal outer gate that opens into a walled-off small yard that travels the length of the house that used to be a street. You enter the house through a wooden door with windows into the hallway that connects to a dining room and kitchen to the right that are in bad condition and are used for storage. A bathroom in the front, a bedroom connected to the living room, with furniture dating from the 70s to the 90s. You know, the light brown particle wood and shag carpet. There, I would have constant nightmares about witches. I constantly felt like someone was behind me, and as a result, began to get afraid of the dark. We lived there while the 2-story apartment building was being built and furnished on top of a 4-story building. The apartment is near the outskirts of town, 1 kilometer from the house. The house is closer to the city center. Fast forward to my 17th birthday. I receive a guitar as a present. Naturally, I was bad at playing it, so in order to practice I needed some place where I wouldn't bother anyone, like my grandma's house. So I get a good 2 to 3 hours of practice, and then it began to get dark, and it gave me the creeps. I chalked it up to the deteriorating house that hadn't been lived in for 10 years. I started to pack up, but first I needed to pee. So I make my way to the bathroom when I start feeling watched. After the flush, I hear what sounds like growling. I stop and go to myself, must be the old pipes, no big deal. I regain my bravery, pack up, and begin to lock up as I go for the door, when I feel like someone's right behind me. So I straight up run out of there and lock the door as fast as possible. Once I'm out of the house, I am met with a strange sense of calm and safety, and chalk it up to the experience of psyching myself up. Then a few years pass, and after a late night party, around 3:30 a.m., I decide I'm drunk and it's too late to go home. Not being in the mood to wake up my parents, I decided it'd be best to sleep out in my grandmother's house. So I lay down on the couch and wake up to the sound of growling. It was so clear that I could pinpoint the origin a foot from the couch. I'm very confused and look at the clock and realize that I only got about 3 hours of sleep, as it was 6:30. So I say to the demon to piss off, sleep is more important, and went back to sleep. Fast forward a few more years, we get a puppy called Sophie. As you know, puppies can be a pain to live with if untrained, so since no one would take the responsibility of training her, and I was very depressed and needed some alone time, I decided to move into my grandmother's house with the dog for a few months to save her from being put up for adoption. She's half golden retriever, quarter cocker spaniel and quarter stray. At the time I was very depressed, had sleeping problems, and was a recovering drunk, so the majority of the content that I consumed was strictly horror. So I was depressed and had anger problems, but the training, although at first difficult, ended in success. Although a couple of months turned into half a year, and during this time a number of events occurred. The first was when I was sitting on the couch in the living room, watching something on the laptop at 10 o'clock. I could see the hallway with the outside door that had a window that you could see through. When from that window I noticed a shadow, which is no big deal since even the smallest insect cast large shadows from the streetlights. But what caught my attention was that it stopped, crouched down, and looked like it got closer, and cupped its hands to peer in. As I turned to see it, it turned around and bolted. Even the dog saw it, so I knew I wasn't hallucinating. But I wasn't really scared since the whole experience lasted about 2 seconds, and I was preoccupied with the laptop, so I quickly suppressed the experience. The second and final thing that happened, and the reason I'm writing this in the first place, was one night I was having difficulty sleeping. So I was binging on horror content when I finally decide it's time to go to bed. I start feeling watched, and think no big deal. It's just the ghost stories that I binged. I turn the lights off and go to bed. After a while, I started hearing this rhythmic tapping on the metal furnace, over which there is a crack with a small hole in the ceiling. I think it's no big deal, it's just small bits of cement crumbling. As I was thinking that, I hear a hard, loud pound, like a fist, so I think a bigger piece may have fallen, or a rat came through the hole. I thought I ought to check it out, so I turn on the light and the light bulb goes out. This may have just been a coincidence, but at this point I had a suspicion that this series of events might be paranormal, so I go lay down on my bed and begin meditating. The feeling of being watched doesn't dissipate, and I say in my mind, if one more thing falls, I'm leaving. 5 seconds pass, and the light bulb that had just gone out, that also happens to be directly over my head, falls, hitting me directly on the testicles. No questions asked, I packed my pillow into my backpack and headed home. After that, I moved back in with my parents, and sometime later my mother experienced the growling. So she tried doing an exorcism with salt, and the dog who was there barked from corner to corner. Where my dog barked, she threw salt until it stopped barking. The ghost is probably not my grandma, who died in '93, 3 years before I was born. It could be from a brothel that was used nearby. Could it be my grandpa, who died around 2012, who used to be an informant for the Socialist Party? However, we believe it to most likely be a friend of my mother who did black magic, as my mother found some sort of ritual with yarn behind the furnace. The house is, as far as I know, now spirit-free, which I now use as my wood-carving workshop and use it often. Even so, the time it scared me crapless will forever live in my memory. Back in the mid-2000s after graduating, I was really going nowhere with my life. I was dating the same guy I had been dating in high school, living at my grandma's house with no car, and worked at the same place my boyfriend worked at. Well, my boyfriend's granddad had been sick for some time. I had not had the chance to meet him, even though me and the boyfriend had been dating for well over 2 years at this point. I knew the granddad's health was heading way down in the recent days, so I was getting ready for work at my crappy job. My boyfriend was already ready, and I was going to catch the city bus. It's an old adobe house, so in winter she hangs blankets from the top of the door to help the cold stay out. Everyone who visits my grandma's house knows how to go to the back door. It leads to the den/living area. Well, as I was straightening my hair, I heard a pow 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 knock on the door. My grandma gets to the door and realizes the blanket is still up. She yells in Spanish to go to the front door, and not 2 seconds later we both hear the same knocking on the front door. My grandma's mumbling to herself and goes to the front door, but no one's there. She calls out in Spanish, then English, but no one answers. I go outside to look around and there isn't a sign of anyone. I got a call from my boyfriend who was at work. He said that he had just got a call from his parents letting him know his granddad had died. And it never happened again. Things didn't work out with my boyfriend in the end, but my grandma, being a cute little old Mexican lady, says that sometimes the dead find a way of saying goodbye. My parents live in a wooded part of Northern California, in an old mining town. We have about 3 abandoned mine shafts. Frankly, they have been used to dump old things or dead rattlesnakes to prevent the dogs from eating them. I know, gross, but yeah. My parents have a fifth-wheeler trailer they park out in front of their yard, and I stay in it when I visit. I'm Native American, so I know there's weird stuff out there. But this night I slept with the windows open anyway, because it was pretty warm. There's a mine shaft perhaps 100 feet away from the property across the road that one of the windows was facing. That's when I started to hear a moan or howling noise coming from that direction. I grew up out there, so I blew it off as a coyote or bobcat, but it slowly sounded more human, like someone who was hurt and moaning in pain. I remember clutching my medicine pouch around my neck and feeling completely unsafe. I peek out the window, and there was an orange-yellow glow coming from inside the shaft. It faces upwards at about a 45-degree angle, and instantly my instincts were screaming, "Nope, time to go." My mum's dog was on the bed shaking, but completely silent. She's a small dog, so she usually barks at her own farts. I scooped her up, crouched around the bed until I got to the door, swung it open and booked it into the house. Thank God the front door was unlocked. I made a bit of a commotion when I came in, and my dad came running out to the bedroom with his gun. I told him I saw Sophie, the dog, was terrified, and she'd actually piddled herself at this point. You could even hear the slight moaning. My dad peeked out the window and literally said, "That's something we should leave alone. I don't like it." Now, my dad is one of those people who's very serious and doesn't believe in supernatural stuff, but he was genuinely scared. I slept on the floor in his room that night, like when I was a kid when I heard a noise. At one point, there was a tapping at the back sliding glass door, but none of the dogs made a peep. They looked in that direction with their hair standing on end, but made no noise, which is absolutely unlike them in every way. Needless to say, whenever I visit the house, I will always sleep inside. Our nanny told me that the house next to us was haunted because we would hear knocking on the walls in our kitchen that is affixed to the next house. There were a lot of times when the cabinets on our kitchen would open randomly and no one would be there to open them. There was this one time I was alone in our house, and there was the sound of the faucet turning on and the water flowing out, even though ours was off. That was strange. I then bought some Chinese incense to help clean the house and kitchen, but the knocking became louder and more continuous. Sometimes I would stay up late, or wake up to get water between 3 and 4 a.m., and I would hear the knocking and the water running. It was on one of these occasions when I was going back to my room when I heard a sound psst, which is a sound that we usually use to call someone back. I didn't turn, but ran back to my room like a madman. I go to a school in another city. It's a large Catholic college for girls. It's also known to be really haunted and happens to be next to a hospital, which is owned by the school. Our dormitory is above the school and is also haunted because it's on the same floor as the cadaver room. It's a medical school. So that's fun. Even during the day, the spirits on the third floor tend to roam, as it's said that it's haunted by the spirit of a girl that died in the hospital. There was this one time when we were in class, we heard the sound of moving chairs and banging on the blackboard. We thought it was the room upstairs, and someone went to check to find there was no one there that was trying to prank us. I kid you not, our screen projector hanging on the wall then moved along with a very loud bang, and it frightened all of us. Our teacher even got really scared and ended up giving us the afternoon off. There was also an urban legend in the hospital that when a patient sees the girl, that patient would die soon. Someone told me that before the school was built, some spiritual expert told the builders or owners of the land that a lot of spirits inhabited the area, and our school and hospital are located in the heart of the city, and you could say, in the heart of this spiritual thing. Not to mention I have my own experience with the hauntings, not just at my house, but at this place as well. So one day, I was coming back to my room. When I was going back to it, which is next to the bathroom, I hear the faucet had been running non-stop. I wondered why someone would turn it on in the middle of the night without turning it off. The tap was completely overflowing. So, I was making my way back. I was accompanied by my older dorm mate at the time, since I had a really bad feeling, and we started to play some religious music to ease my mind. I then began hearing whispers, and the sound of a lady crying. I couldn't understand the whispers, and I got really scared and went to my dorm mate's room and told her I couldn't sleep in that room tonight. She told my classmate who stayed in our dorm before, and who had a similar experience. So when I went to get some pillows and blankets, the whispers intensified. It sounded like they were right close to my ear, and that was the time I had a panic attack and hurried and went to her room. I didn't sleep that night, and in the morning I told my other dorm mates next to our room what I had experienced, and we all got scared as we were rushing and prepare for class. After that, the psychosis started to happen. I was actually diagnosed with bipolar and schizoaffective since then, and my first episode happened in 2014. Before that, I was already feeling really stressed from school, lightheaded, and started to see things during class. I don't know, or didn't know if it was spiritual back then, but I'm relatively certain that the stress, accompanied with everything that happened, slowly put me in the hospital and made me need to start taking medication for the mental illnesses that I was dealt with from what I believe to have been these experiences. I think many of them happened because of the stress. Please stay healthy out there, people. You never know what something so terrifying can do to your body. One night I was driving home at around 2 a.m, and this tiny white creature, probably as tall as a Pringle can, though maybe a bit smaller, walked across the road in front of my car. I couldn't believe what I saw, so I called my then boyfriend and frantically described this creature. He told me that it sounded like the Fresno Nightcrawler, and when I got home and looked it up, it's exactly what it looked like. I'd never heard about them before. I did not live in California, not even close, and still had no clue what it looked like. Some more details about what I saw, because I hadn't thought about it in a while. The bottom of its legs ended in what looked like flowy bits or ribbons, as it was almost translucent. I could almost see through the creature. It walked a kind of jaunty pace like a person may walk. The best way to describe it is a bit like the dwarfs in Snow White. I slowed my car down but was too afraid to stop completely, and the thing disappears as my car went through it. Honestly, it was so cute that I wasn't even scared, but I was shaken up having seen something so weird. When I was 10 or 11, I was in the living room with my grandma watching TV, when the outside dogs that we had began to bark like crazy. It was about 9:30, so I got up and walked into my grandma's bedroom and peeked through the blinds, and at first nothing looked out of the ordinary, and I didn't see anyone. I stood there for a few seconds looking around to make sure that nothing was out there when I noticed movement from the corner of my eye, and the motion light on the back of the house kicked on. And yes, I did see something. It was under the RV we had behind the house. I yelled for my grandma, and she came and looked out the window, and she had also seen this thing. It was about 6 foot and had white hair. We made eye contact, and I watched this thing that looked at me and noticed me. To this day, me and my grandma talk about what we saw, but yet we have no idea what exactly it may have been. My grandmother recently left our house. Among her things were the priest's robe of my deceased uncle, a wooden chalice, a silver cross, empty holy water bottles, and her book of exorcisms, all stored in her suitcase. I grew up seeing how he knew how to clean people and things. I decided to keep that in the cellar so that no one ever touched it. Then I found it again in my bed, with the suitcase open, and all the articles scattered, with the book open. I decided when I saw that perhaps it was time to give all of these items to another priest, in case there was something hideously wrong with them. This happened about 5 years ago. I grew up in a religious household, which means my family believes in the supernatural. My parents had told me stories, and I have had my own experiences. This past Christmas, my then fiancé brought me a huge panda bear that was almost as tall as me. I loved it and slept with it in my bed. After we got married and I moved into his apartment, there wasn't much room for the panda, so we placed it in the storage closet. Now, what happened last Thursday is something that has not happened to me in over a decade. After moving in, I kept feeling weird sleeping in the bedroom, specifically when I was by myself. I always got that strong sensation in something or someone watching me. I just brushed it off and figured the feeling was being in a new place. On this night I was dreaming, which was normal, when my husband woke me up out of the blue and saw me shaking as if I was having a seizure. He was going to call 911 when I woke up, sat right up and gasped. That's when I saw a white hooded figure standing over him on the right side of the bed, looking at us. My heart almost burst out my chest. It had been a long time since I'd seen an entity. He asked what was wrong, and I said there was something looking at us. He turned to look in front of our bed where the TV stand is, and he said it's sitting on the table. And it went away, but neither of us could sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, he asks if we thinks the panda had anything to do with it, because he got an eerie feeling when I walked past it. I tell him I feel the same way whenever I looked at it. Even our dog barks and attempts to attack it. We contemplated the whole day on whether or not we should throw it out. The following day he goes to work, and I'm alone with the dogs and decide to cleanse the house using the anointing oil my parents gave me and pray. Every time I walked past the closet with the panda in, my whole body would get cold, and I would have shivers and goosebumps. I called my husband and told him what happened, and when he came home he threw it out. It feels a little better in the apartment, but my parents are supposed to be coming this weekend to do more praying and cleansing. Hopefully it will get rid of anything that was left over. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so very much for listening. I really appreciate all of you sticking around and listening to the end. I love you guys so much. Thank you. You mean the world to me. I hope you did enjoy tonight's stories. If of course you did, it'd be nice to let me know. I do appreciate that. And I'd like to extend a huge thank you, as always, to my members and my patrons, whose names are on screen, for their continued support and devotion to this channel. You guys really do mean the world to me. Thank you so much. You know, you guys just sticking around really helps, well, makes the channel what it is, and without you guys, there would be nothing. So I'm really grateful to each and every one of you. I'm going to wrap things up here, though. Hopefully see you in the next installment on Saturday. But until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.